Hi there. So I'm just going to begin sharing my slides, and we'll give a couple of minutes for people to dial in. So this call will formally begin in a few minutes. While we are waiting for people to dial in, I will display the antitrust policy notice from the Linux Foundation. We show this at the beginning of every call, and our full antitrust policy notice can be found on the Linux Foundation website. The purpose of this antitrust policy is to make sure that everyone can speak freely and comfortably. If you're from a Linux Foundation member company, you can ask our counsel, UptiGrove, any questions you have around this policy. And naturally, if you have any general questions, you can ask us something on this call at any time. Now, because it's just on the hour and we need to give people a minute to dial in, I will just leave this antitrust policy notice up until 10:02. 10:02 in Japan, I should say. 9:02 in China, and that's going to be 1:02 UTC time. Okay, let's get started. Now, our regular agenda, what we're going to cover on this call is being displayed on the screen. We'll have a recap of news. If you were on our earlier call in March, a lot of this news will be familiar. It is being repeated here for the parties joining from Asia. We'll work on the standards and our core material on our time available. We'll have a brief period for any other business, and then we'll close the meeting. For your information, I plan to have this meeting run until about 10:45 to 10:50. If we need more time, we can hit towards the turn of the hour, but we'll try to wrap it up with a little bit of space at the end for any general conversations, questions, or other business. So let's move into the specification news. The largest news we have on our specifications is that our security specification now has its ISO IEC DIS number. DIS means Draft International Standard, and it means that our security standard is now an official ISO IEC draft. We expect it to go into the ballot period for becoming a formal ISO IEC standard in the end of March onwards, according to our past mentors at JTC1. So that means the OpenChain Security Assurance Specification 1.1 is now ISO IEC DIS 1894. After successfully passing the ballot around the middle of this year, it will become ISO IEC 18974. So the Draft International Standard, DIS, will be removed. Long story short, it's great that we're at this stage, and it also allows you to know what our ISO number will be when we graduate. We've had lots of interesting stuff in terms of improving the OpenChain project. We're on Wikipedia, which is nice. Our reference library has had a huge overhaul, and our community calendar has been dramatically improved to make it easier to find everything. We've been doing a lot of events. Some of the interesting stuff you might want to watch is a recent webinar on GPL v2 licensing history, which highlighted 40 variants of the GPL2 on the FSF and GNU websites, and 12 variants in the Linux kernel. Intriguing webinar and some good notes there. We had an automation case study touching on automation around security, and we had our usual things like our education workgroup meeting to talk about what type of material they're making to help people with our standards. Lots of conformance announcements and partnership announcements. Basically, the overarching news is, as usual, more people are adopting our standards, and as usual, more partners are offering support for them around the world. We have had local meetings occurring and local activities. For instance, our German work group is currently working on translating our online training course, LFC 193. Adjacent to this, I should note that Mary Hardy from Microsoft has done huge work to help improve LFC 193, and that update will be pushed live shortly by LF Training. We were invited to an interesting standardization meeting by Alibaba for the Open Anolis project, a cloud operating system. And our Japan work group, as usual, is terrifically busy. One of the main things they're doing right now is having lots of OSPO meetings. Kicking off March, in fact, in just the first week, our export control meeting work group had a great meeting, and we expect them to meet again and do some significant work on community resources. A bunch of individuals there are collaborating with a researcher who had a large-scale reference project that has been on the internet for a while, and the individuals from Export Control Work Group are going to move that from a static website into GitHub to help make it easier for that researcher and others to update it in the future. The other stuff that we've had going on includes our telco work group having a very interesting series of meetings. As you may recall, they have been focused on looking at a meta bomb, explaining how do you use a bill of materials in telco? What type of framing do you need? So a specification, looking at how you use a specification. They're not making a standard, but they're looking at how to build an approach to adopting SBOMs in telco. And we had a great recap of FOSDEM. An interesting data point for you is that we crossed the part of having 10 official third-party certifiers around the world. And that happened in early March. Now, what's very interesting beyond that, and this is where I'm very glad to share additional news, is that while we crossed 10 at the beginning of March, since then we've had another exciting conformance announcement, which you'll find on our website, and we've hit our 11th with CESI, which of course is an important entity in China working on standards. So that's nice. And there I wrap up our project news, and I'm just going to flag something that SPDX sent us. They've been doing a lot of technical work with their Python libraries for SPDX, support for things like the next generation SPDX 3. They've been pulling together the material for the SPDX 3 standard on GitHub. They expect to add their last branches soon. And they've provided some updates with regards to the SPDX license list, which came out in middle February. Moving on to OSPO news, we had something from To-Do Group. A couple of things here. The To-Do Group Open Source Engagement Working Group announced its goals and planning. OSPology Live, which is co-organized with OpenChain and SPDX, OpenSSF, LF Energy, Chaos, and so on, has some updates about what's going to be happening throughout this year. And they have a webinar discussing transition paths for regulated environments in the context of OSPOs. And at last, their mind map is now in Chinese. So they're busy doing lots of stuff to support OSPOs around the world. On the automation side, our automation work group has had a reboot. They're resetting the work group to focus on how to map out the current open source compliance tooling chain and how to improve it. They're currently having calls to take that into action, and everyone is invited to join them on the mailing list. Okay, that ends our news. You have received a copy of these slides through our mailing list. And if you have not, don't worry, I will be resending these slides after the call. That will give you access to all of the links we just covered. Okay, we're going to work on the standards now. And the first thing I'll do before moving into our collaborative phase is just note what we did on the last meeting. So we did a lot of stuff around the security assurance draft. This is the security assurance second generation standard draft. And this is where we're looking at not what's becoming the ISO standard now, but an update to the ISO standard probably in a year or so. We looked at 5 issues that existed already. Some of them were discussed before, and some of them we had said we'll come to it in this call. And as an outcome of the discussions, we also opened a new issue. Long story short, things like remediation and mitigation are clearer. Obtain customer agreement is improved. And we've basically had some tweaks and clarifications around topics like, do we reference other ISO standards? Do we add requirements to competence and so on? This meeting, we have 4 items to potentially run through on the security specification and 2 on the licensing specification. If you're new, you might be wondering why, for instance, on the last meeting, we did a lot of work on the security spec. How does that relate to the licensing spec? The short answer is these are sister standards. So when we're looking at open issues on GitHub, which affect a standard, then we cross-check and make sure the other standard, if impacted, is also improved. So when we go through something like security stuff here, if we do something like, let's say, program objectives that happens to also impact licensing, that will be synced with the licensing standard in the future. The same also applies if we do something like adding a definition of bill of materials to the licensing standard. That improvement would be potentially synced with the security standard. One reason that we have co-chairs for security and licensing is to make sure that we are going to be in a situation where our sister standards are perfectly aligned. And if you use one, the requirements barring the specifics of licensing or the specifics of security, if you use one, you can use the other. All right. We have we have the security items to look at to get started today. And we also have Chris, our chair of the security side of the specification on the line. Chris, if it's okay for you, I suggest what I do is I open the first issue, so the triage entry, and we see what that is and maybe if we can work on it. Would that be all right on your side?
That sounds good.
Okie dokie. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to be showing things on my web browser here. So we're just going into this GitHub issue. And we have the ability to edit the specification. Just for your reference, I also have a copy of the specification open beside me right here. And this is the security specification draft 2.0. Okay, so this is the version, the second generation version that all of our actions on this call can be. By and large, I will not be editing this document directly. I will be looking at the GitHub thing with you. And when we make a decision, we will make a note on the GitHub issue. And once that note is in, if we're happy with it, then I will edit the specification. So if we are closing this issue with a change, we'll make a note here that we're closing it with the following change to the specification. Then I will update the specification and submit that new version into our repository. That will mean that people will always see oh, we've done something, one action, we do that, then I'll update the specification and submit that small update. And we'll do that for every update. So people will also always be able to see, oh, this issue led to this small update as we go. Okay, that was just for people who are new to the call. Chris, so this is something that Helio, I think, added last week, 2 weeks ago. And I suppose the question is, this improvement suggested is a process to determine if a reported vulnerability affects the component used. And the question, I think, is, should we add something regarding that? And we have a suggestion from Jan in Germany that we should rephrase part of the current standard. So he's suggesting we should rephrase something here. I'm going to pull up the current standard. Normally, when we're doing a rephrase, we try to have the old language and new language together. In this case, we only have a proposed new language in play. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add the old language right now. Okay. 332. Apologies for the delay. I'm just opening the relevant section standard. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm adding the old language and proposed new language right now, and I'm going to quickly add it to the issue so that it's clearer what we're doing. Okay, proposed new language. So this kind of housekeeping is naturally boring, but it's just so that we can trace back what's going on. Okay. All right. So, oh, I'm so silly. I made a mistake with that, and I'll fix it. In GitHub, what's great is we can fix our mistakes. Okay, so I'm just putting this down here. Okay. I think he wrote the result. Okay. So what I'm seeing, my immediate takeaway is that it looks like he's adding a lot more words to the section. So we should probably make a real thought here about whether this is getting too wordy. It looks wordy.
Technically, the old language that's in there is not correct. That's not how those things work. The components in the bill of material are scanned before they're ever seen by anyone, and so all of the discovered vulnerabilities are included in the output from the scanner, whether it's coupled together with your licensing scanner or they're two separate scans, that one's reviewed by licensing people and the other scans are reviewed by the security folks, and then they blend them together to decide whether or not it's usable as is. So I think that there's some factual misunderstanding in the old language, in the bullets that are there. The second proposed new language is a lot more correct, because what it's talking about is after you've run the scans for licensing and for security, then for the security part, there is a vulnerability assessment that's usually provided by the tool, and it identifies the CVEs or the reported vulnerabilities if they don't have a CVE number yet, and they come with a initial score that usually comes out of the National Vulnerability Database by the tool. And that's what the security people actually sit and look at while they're doing their assessments, is they start there and then they figure out how the component is being used and start doing their triage as they're going through it and determining in this application, how is this component used? Is all of it used? Is part of it used? Or is just a little of it used? And from that, then they start working up their remediation or mitigation responses to see if they can either eliminate the risk totally by doing a remediation if the fix is known, or they try to mitigate the risk by determining that my application doesn't do anything with databases, and therefore this vulnerability and the explanation that comes with it, the CVE, the CWE, it are not pertinent to this application.
Mm-hmm. And so then, looking at this, you think that the proposed new language, Jan's approach to clarifying it, could fit in better and replace the points. This goes down to customers. So basically, then to replace these 5 with this one. So Jan's motive was to take the initial bullet point, remove it, turn it into an introduction sentence, and he included the supply method for detecting existence. And then he ran down to customer notification. Yeah, so that would be replacing these bullet points with this paragraph and these bullet points. And what I'll do is then show the whole work as proposed. Just putting it together, put it down here. Yeah. Okay. Oh. All right. It doesn't allow me to. It doesn't allow me to extend my text box. Okay, hang on 1 second. This is a little messy.
Yeah, I think it still needs some massaging to make sure that the text now is all correct for all of the points that are in there. But I think that covers it better than the first one that we were looking at, the old language.
Yeah, changing it into an introductory sentence like that and combining that introduction sentence with the first bullet point, the scanning, looks clearer. I'm just wondering, does anyone else on the call have any comments about this? I know you might take a moment to read the combined work, but feel free to jump in with any comments or notes. I noticed Jeff is unmuted, but we don't hear you, so it's possible.
I was pausing for a moment because I came in late. I didn't want to jump in real quick. I just wanted to add a note that I like how it's been combined here. I do agree with Chris that I think we could do a little bit of the massaging of the language. Just whenever there's a bunch of commas in a row, I get a little lost in but I like how it looks, but I think I just need to look. I'd like to do a little massaging. I'll go take a look and make some GitHub comments on that.
Yep, I agree. The too many commas confuses just about everybody, including me.
What I've done is I've thrown this into the chat so that it's available for review right now, and people can just take that link away and have a look at it later. Okay. So Our outcome then is that Jan's restructuring of this appears to make the workflow more sensible. As Chris pointed out, it maps closer with what we can expect from security team practice in terms of the workflow. And we now are looking at making the language a little bit clearer and more compact. So that's the action item. And what I'll do is add that as a node. 21. I'm going to tag Jan so he knows we were talking about him. Uh, okay, so this note is just going to be there that we got to this stage, but we're not done. And because this issue is not done, I will not be, I'll not be changing the standard. So in essence, then the current draft will not include that change until we're saying we're done with the change on this GitHub issue. The reason there is that we currently haven't decided precisely what we're doing with this language, and it may be better to include it once we're finished with finessing it. But I want to throw it to the room and see if that is okay with you, that we focus on keeping this issue open until we're happy with the language, and then we merge it with the draft. Or do you prefer that we keep iterating the draft with the rolling open issues? Okay. In that case, then the workflow will be that we iterate on the open issues, and when we're ready to close an issue, we take the changed language, if any, we put it into the standard, and we iterate the draft. That means that people can see what's coming in the standard by clicking the open issues, and they'll see what needs to be discussed, what language hasn't been included. And what is reflected in the draft is what's under the closed issues as well as the open ones. So they can see, oh, we made a decision here to include mitigation, and that was done. So it was added. So that's our current workflow. Okie dokie. So we've had a look at that one. That's our first one of the day right here. So it's the triage entry. Now that's not done yet. The issue's still open. So we'll come back to that after people have a chance to look at it. Chris, shall I proceed to the second item? Is that okay?
Yes, if everybody's happy with everything, let's go.
All right. Second item is comments on the known vulnerability in the proposed security assurance specs. I'm adding this to our chat so you can open the issue yourself. So this is from SC Lin, who's on the call, which is convenient. This was he wanted to change the word receive in the first step rather than respond. Is that right?
Yes, because the first step is to receive the information from external or the any stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Because response is the action.
Mm-hmm.
So you may choose not to respond after the investigation. That is my intention to address. because according to the common practices in the cybersecurity standard, the first step is always be the receive. And then the organization or the company can analyze the information to see how they will proceed in the next step. So that is my 2 cents.
Good point.
Yep, I agree with that.
So on our last call, we briefly looked at this, and we were looking at mostly this block of text where that we should add more steps. On that call, adding more steps was not in favor because people were worried it would veer into the how rather than the what. So this second part, they weren't in favor of adding these handling steps from other cybersecurity standards. So the note was, we'll think about that type of expansion, but we didn't go into the word receive as opposed to respond in any detail.
If I recall correctly, in the few months before, a participant mentioned if we use respond word,
Yes.
it may cause the denial of service attack. If I recall correctly, he mentioned if a malicious attacker sent a lot of the fake issues, and then it makes the company crazy because they have to respond.
Yes, if the receive also triggered a response, which is a good point. I'm guessing that if we have a receive, we should have a analyze before we have a respond. So the analysis could result in no response.
Yeah, actually, it would be analyze and remediate or mitigate before you do any response.
A good point.
I would think.
Now, Stephen had a note where he wasn't quite happy with changing respond into receive because he felt it was talking about the mechanism rather than the process, and the outcome of a process is a response. I don't know, guys. For me, I think that it's a process to receive and then internally manage and respond. I think it's still a process. I'm not sure I agree with Stephen on that one. Okay, so the notes we had, Chris had a note on the last one that this section should be to establish or potentially establish two-way communication to receive an input of vulnerability and responding to it as necessary. And Mary from Volvo noted that everyone should have the freedom to have their own process. So, apart from the expansion question, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think that while she's correct in what she said, I think that the goal of the specification is to provide the minimum requirements.
Yes.
In order to do this, not necessarily to give somebody a word-by-word process of how they follow it. So, she's correct in what she said. But you can't take that too literally and say everybody's got the freedom to do whatever process they want to do with the receipt of a vulnerability. Tuck it under your pillow, put it under your wine glass, whatever you choose to do, or you could analyze it and then either mitigate it or remediate the problem if there's a known fix.
This would then suggest, beginning with the first half, the receive respond, that we might want to say that you have a process, and this is just example language, receive, review, and respond to known vulnerability external inquiries. Would that capture the spirit of it, or is this just making it more messy?
I think that would make it more messy. I don't think that you really want to open up a channel to the world to come in and inquire whether your software's got any known vulnerabilities when you haven't had a chance to respond to them yet.
So in this case, should we just take SC's suggestion and change it from respond to receive?
Well, I think that, you know, in the end result, my opinion, and anybody can feel free to contradict me if they like, is that the security process is all about receiving all of the information that they can get from all of the external sources like package managers and National Vulnerability Database and all the places where you go to look for CVEs and then look at the CWEs and the severity scores that are available, so that you can scope the problem and then do your analysis of how that component fits into what you're developing. And then when you run the final run and you come up with your SBOMs, there's your report to your customers, if they have desire to get such a report, that these are what I did to fix the vulnerabilities that were in my software that I'm building for you. Whether that's 50 customers or whether it's 10,000 customers for the washing machine. It's, so that's a scope thing, but you don't just respond to any external inquiries, in my opinion. Only if it's pertinent to the person who's asking it and pertinent to you, that you provide them with that information, because they're a user. They are buying the software, they're get a subscription to the software or whatever, and you're feeding them the information.
Makes sense. And to help with that discussion, I've just copy pasted, I've just displayed the draft, which the current text, I believe, is pretty much the same as the first generation, which shows the entire section for context. And I guess then we have to review the entire section to improve the context. And SC, please feel free to jump in and so on. And Jeff, I notice you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add a note. I'll put it in the chat here. I think this maps very nicely. There's been a push for this idea of a security.txt file, as well as known ways of reporting and responding to vulnerabilities. And I was talking to a couple folks the other day who weren't aware of this. It's not a standard, but it's something that people are pushing. So I'll put a link in the chat here, which is basically a file and a location that people are using for their websites and SaaS projects for reporting and responding to vulnerabilities. And since we're building a standard that talks about how do you report and respond to these, it might be nice to just look at this and see how other folks are making proposals for this type of reporting. So if you haven't seen this before, it's basically a file that you host on your website or SaaS project and provides information about your security address, your signing key to validate your communications, and so on and so on. So just something to take a look at if you haven't seen this before.
That's a really good resource to review.
Yeah.
So, I mean, pulling that mindset into our security text, if someone wanted to have a way for people looking at a given software offering and asking a question about known vulnerabilities, having something like that security text could make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that would definitely meet the current requirements we have, the publicly visible method to allow parties to make inquiries. And then there's the internally documented procedure to actually do something about it. So I mean, I guess the question for us then is, with this access thing, where people are going to receive or respond to known vulnerability inquiries, are we doing the right thing in the way we phrase it currently? Is this something that could or should be tightened up to, say, customers or users only? Would there be consequences to that? For instance, would we accidentally cause a problem with the white hat area where researchers and so on could get rebuffed by sections of the organization when they're just trying to help, and so on? So, is this something that we need to change? And also, second question, do we need to change it, that one word, receive, based on SC's comment?
This is Jeff here. I would say I like what we have in the verification materials right now. I think it's good to be very specific. And even if we say, oh, that maps to something like security.txt, outside of the standard, I think it's okay to say, yes, you need to have a way to make an inquiry, and we have to have a procedure, and so on and so on. So I think it's good to specifically call those out.
Mhm.
And then that allows me, for example, at my company to say, and how we respond, how we do this in 3211 and 3212 is we have a security text file, or we have a security at email address, whatever is appropriate for our company or project, et cetera. You can imagine an IoT device might not have a security.txt file, but might have an email address written on it for reporting. So I like keeping that as is. And versus receive versus respond. I think receive is the minimum one, and I'd be okay with it being left as receive. I can imagine people say you can report error, you can report vulnerabilities, but we're not going to ever respond. And then eventually it becomes a receive respond cycle. Receive or respond, or receive and possibly respond.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you can't only receive them. I mean, you could, but you'd probably stop getting inputs if people who are providing them to you, be it a third-party package manager or whomever, and they were reporting them to you out of the goodness of their hearts, and you never tell them that, yeah, we've managed to fix that, or we've mitigated the request for the problem, and with a light explanation. I think that'd probably be fine to do.
This is Jeff again here. I know there are some cases in the commercial world where, because of NDAs and similar, you're not able to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even though we're looking in the open source world here, I think that's still something that people may have their hands tied because of whatever NDAs or other restrictions they're on. But we want to at least have an ability to receive.
Yeah, and in the purely open source world, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. They should be receive and respond. But you're right, in the commercial world, sometimes you can't always do that. So
would it make sense to say,
make it optional?
Yeah, receive and potentially respond to known vulnerability inquiries? Would that make sense?
Yeah.
This is SD. I can share my experiences. When I work for the previous company, we don't respond every known vulnerability inquiries from external. We only respond the external inquiries from our customers, because the competitors, many unknown organization will send lots of the inquiries to you, and basically we just receive and analyze, and then we may not to respond.
Would it
Exactly. Yeah.
would it make sense to say, if appropriate,
Yeah, that would be great, because the competitors may send lots of queries or inquiries to the certain company, try to get some information.
So the consequence of this change from maintain a process to respond to known vulnerability external inquiries to receive and, if appropriate, respond would mean that you'd have to think through the workflow, but you could make the judgment call on response. So
Mm-hmm.
that seemed to accomplish our goal of making sure there's a process, but it would also accomplish the fact that people can bin everything that's noise. Okay. If that
Jeff,
makes
does that scratch your itch?
I think it does. I mean, I always have this concern that we add too many sentences and parenthetical comments and make
Yeah.
it perfect, but make it maybe too hard to read, especially if English isn't your first language or if it makes it more difficult to translate appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fine. I don't think it added complexity here. I think the question is just, should we have a input side and then an output side? There's a report and then a reporting process. People should be able to tell you that you have problems, and then is there a separate and here's how you tell your customers or the public or whatnot. And I don't think I know enough right now to say one versus another. I think I need to look at the whole spec again in as it's been updated here to see if there's something missing. But to answer your question, I like what it says right now with the always overhanging. Did we add too many words?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could we break it into two points, an input side, like you said, and an output side?
Yeah.
My suggestion is that what we do is potentially lock this down because it contains the right workflow now and say this looks okay at the workflow. And then a little bit later, when the standard is more coming together and we've closed our issues, we open a new issue for wordsmithing and go through this and start hammering each item to try to make it as small and as compact as possible.
I would say thumbs up to that, Shane.
Yep.
And one reason I'm suggesting that is because we probably want to go through this entire thing and have that workflow of let's compress this, and the compression method we use should be pretty consistent throughout. So it might make sense to have that as a workflow item. Okay.
That's a good idea.
I occasionally have them. Rarely, but it happens. It's been known to happen. Okay, so what I've done here is I have added the improved language for clarity. I'm going to add that to the GitHub. I'm going to say that on this call, we visited the first part of Missy's suggestion to receive. Response optional. Okay, and if that language, oh, sorry, I was sharing the wrong screen for you guys. Okay, my apologies, talking to myself and typing. This is the proposal that I have for GitHub to lock this off. And if that's okay for you, then we'll close this comment and submit this language into the spec. But that will require, no one to object right now. And Chris to say it's okay.
Well, it's important that we get SZ to agree, or if he likes it. Does that work?
It looks good to me.
All right.
All right. In that
Do it.
case, I'm on it right now. So SE, for a quick recap, your respond receive has been included. The call didn't choose to add the extra items from other security standards because that was reviewed on our previous call and people felt that would be going too much into how rather than what. This is something you can reopen as a topic if you wish, but for now what we have is people didn't want to include other cybersecurity standard details, but the receive respond was accepted as feedback and is going into the standard. This issue is being closed for now, but you can open it at any time, SC, if you want to take another run at having these bullet points put in. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, excellent. And for everyone who's new on the call, always remember that even if we close an issue, you can reopen it. Closing an issue means that we are grabbing something and we are putting it into the standard. And then I am going somewhere to adjust the actual submission of the standard, which is happening here. And I have edited and saved it. This change to the sentences is being submitted. I will just copy in the issue number and the text I included with the rationale. And that's it. The standard has now been, the draft standard has now been updated. And on GitHub, if people open up this document for the draft of 2.0, they will find that our change under 322? Yeah.
322 or 321?
321, apologies, is now updated. So that issue is closed and updated. And that means we're finished discussing it for now. Something has been committed to the standard or rejected. If you reopen it, it will be under reconsideration in the future. Okay, everyone, we've therefore closed one issue, and we have edited another issue, but not completed it. We've edited this one, but not completed it, and we want some help with wordsmithing that. So we have new language proposed, but it's quite wordy. So we want to do a quick improvement on that. This is something to do ahead of the overall standard wordsmithing. This is something we want to do soon. So if you could have a look at that, link has been put in chat, and improve that, that will be super useful and we can review it on the next call. Due to time limitations, I think we probably need to call it a day there. We have improved this issue. We have closed this issue. We have 2 more security issues to cover on the next call, and we have 2 licensing issues to cover on the next call as well. For your reference, if you're bored of us editing, let's say, security issues, you can always say, guys, just open a licensing issue, and we'll work on that. So you just speak up if you want us to work on something else. We're going through this basically in order of the stack we have, and we can reorder it. With that, I just want to thank everyone, especially Chris. Thank you for sharing what we're up to. Huge thanks to Jeff and also especially SC for helping us with that excellent contribution. Please have a beautiful day and take care. I'll see you on the next call in 2 weeks. And if you're in Asia, I'll see you in 4. Be well.
Very good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Likewise.
Happy spring. Bye-bye.
Oh, that's right. It's spring. Yes, indeed. Everything's looking up.